this is the model that we're going to be using. So it is actually the employee life cycle. So I think it's very good to kind of look at HR from that of an employee life cycle. It's good to kind of see the flow, where an employee starts, how you develop, look at employee relations issue, and then you get into performance management, corrective action, and then termination. So that's not to say that everybody has a beginning to end. So this can be kind of a gloomy way to look at HR, but it's the reality. There is an employee life cycle. And so it's a good way to kind of frame the discussion about HR, to kind of know what are you talking about in relation to the employee life cycle. So it's a good framing mechanism to let you know, okay, this topic, where does it fit in terms of HR? So I love this layout. This is 4 little sections, but it is very much overly simplistic. HR is a complex field, and so what we had to do also when I did this, we had to look at it in terms of who this course is for, but then also take a realistic view of who this course is not for. And so it's important to look at it from that standpoint. Before I get into that, these are the 4 parts. So we start with, how do you find employees? Interviewing and selection. There's a lot of changes there. We're going to talk about social media, interview processes, interview techniques. And then I also look to gather input from a lot of participants that are going through the course. So just because I'm the person standing up with a clicker doesn't mean that I'm the expert. There's a tremendous amount of expertise from people that are here. So I want to make this part of our classroom experience, and there's a lot of input that I hope that you will be comfortable to share. I think that makes for a really, really good session. So we start with interviewing and selection. Then we get into employee development. So how do you find them? How do you develop them? Then we get into a big section, employee relations. So this, we'll talk about the third part, employee relations, and then we get into discipline and termination. This will be a good description. There's so many different elements that have changing. Social media has changed. The policy has not kept up with technology, and what can I do with that? So there's some good discussions there. So that's a recruitment phase. So that'll be the first session. Then we get into development, and this one we are separating employee relations issues. So, and typically this part, if it was a shorter class, I would put this together. So I'm really excited that we're separating this, because notice by design, this section, and you'll have a manager or somebody that says, I need to write this person up, I need to fire this person, why are they not this, why are they not that? Well, many times we go from here, honeymoon, to divorce right away. Well, you haven't invested the right time. You don't have the right processes. So you go from that to, wow, this is the greatest, who the heck are you, and leave. And that's what happens. Well, you skip a big part of the process. I had a mentor of mine who used to always say, bad processes beat good people every time. Bad processes beat good people every time. So I just left the client earlier. They have non-existent processes in a growing organization. So they're saying, we have all this turnover. You're losing all this wonderful talent because the level you were at the stage you were at has changed. And the rules beneath your feet have changed. And now you have to look at development and employee relations in a whole new way, in a way you never thought you needed to. So you have to change your mind there. And so this is an important section that honestly a lot of HR leaders forget that. They push through this part. So that's I have job descriptions here, but we've already covered it. Now we get into developing performance review process. This is how can I refresh or retool my performance review process? What does that look like? And this is going to be a big discussion. I'll give you a roadmap. The challenge is going to be for us, developing a performance review process looks very different with a 5,000 employee operation from a 100 employee local operation. Very different. So I'm going to give you some foundations on what that looks like. So then we get into now developing the review process, evaluating employee compensation. Another piece, if we have time, we'll talk about that one. And here's another one in terms of employee development. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some opportunities around training grants that are available. Orientation and onboarding, and by the way, these are with the state, these are with TWC, so I'll talk a little bit about those and some of the options there. And then we talk about developing and retooling your orientation and onboarding process. So again, a lot of these topics you might say, yeah, I know these, I got these, I know what they are, but many times you need it, it's hard to take a step back and evaluate them to say, okay, you know what, out of that component, we were doing 8 of those 10 things, but these 2 little pieces, I had thought of, wow, that's great, let's put those into play in our process. So now we get into the good old, your best friend, the employee handbook. How do you develop it? How do you refresh it? Again, this one we've already talked about. I should have taken it out, we talked about in the previous one. Now we get into conducting fair and legal employee investigations. What are the mechanics around those? And when I say manage employee conflict, we'll go through some models. It's also for your department, but then we'll also talk a little bit about in HR, this is what happens. Well, so-and-so is having a problem with so-and-so, or somebody complains, so they go to you to say, he doesn't like me, or he or she is talking bad of me. So you, HR, you fix this for me. Fix it. Well, you're HR. I'm going to go complain to HR, and they think you're the law. Well, oh, you poor little dear, you. I'm going to fix it for you? And, oh, how dare they? We're going to fix them right up. No, that's not your role. To a certain extent, but you have a responsibility to how do I coach, do we have a grievance process? And even before a grievance process, what are some of the tools organizationally that we can develop to teach our people, our leaders, how to manage this in-house and how to keep something from bubbling up into a bigger issue? 80% of these problems happen because they're ignored or they're improperly managed. They forget it, out of mind, out of sight, or they manage it too aggressively, and it becomes this bigger issue, and now you get the attorneys involved, and now everybody loses. So I'll talk a little bit about preventative strategy there. And then creating a positive work environment. So this topic alone, my gosh, this is a whole class in itself. On this way, these are the topics that I felt from my experience we had to cover. The other big challenge that I had was what to leave off. There's a bunch of stuff here that I had to take off. And so we can talk through that, and I can help you with, if there's something on here that's not there, we can talk and we can come up with, I can give you some advice or something there. And now we get into discipline and separation. So now we get into developing, well, we already covered this. We get into these 2 parts, employee discipline and employee termination. I'll talk to you a little bit about that process, but I will review the traditional corrective action process and how that works and how that doesn't work, how that ties into your employee handbook, and how maybe you can make some changes into your employee orientation and onboarding process. So you can kind of see how all of this ties up. Many times employers want to jump here and get into this section. How do I write them up? How do I fire them? You have to be very critical of yourself as an organizational leader to say, hold on. Yes, there's a problem, but there's a percentage of that is our fault as an organization to not support a better process to manage that, to prevent that. So we skip through that and say, well, you're HR, help me write them up so we don't go to jail. I get it, you're going to have to do that. It happens, and a good HR person will do that. But you have to raise your hand to say, hold on, we own a certain percentage of the problem here, and we have a responsibility to retool that process. So this is where it's also good. I can help you with some verbiage, some thought processes, some laws, some stuff that you can go back to your organizations and maybe say, you know what, there's an element we're missing. I went to this training thing. Oh, they're going to say, what did you do? You got something and you're going to try to implement it. And so I'll help you with that. So my goal is for you to walk out of here with some practical tools. Those of you who have a little more experience, my goal is to hopefully refresh and retool you with some things that maybe you haven't thought of, that you might say, okay, there's some concepts here that I didn't think of that I'm going to use, but I think it's a good walkthrough going through the employee life cycle. I ask you, as you go through this process, you're going to wear 2 hats. You're going to go through this as a learner. So I'm going to ask you to kind of put some of your judgments on hold and be open to the possibility of a different way. But at the same time, I don't want you to discredit that. You have a lot of experience that you bring I just ask you, when you come to the sessions, you're going to come to that with a view of, how can I implement some of this or tweak this in my world? So you come with, I'm here to learn something, and two, the practical sense, what can I take from that component and put in practice back in my place?